Hi, welcome back to the shed for episode 9 of GGBO 2023, and in this episode we're going to continue with the work of fitting the body wings onto the centre of the guitar. So for me the next logical thing to do is get these body wings prepared so that when the time is right and we've done all the other things that need doing, we can get them glued in position. And to make this a nice clean joint, a number of things have to happen. This edge on the wing needs to be perfectly flat, and it also needs to be perfectly square along its length. Now just a quick look at that indicates that it is actually quite square, and I'll just check it with a straight edge, in this case a big level. It doesn't have to be kind of straight to microscopic standards, but you don't really want any gaps where you'll see visible light coming through this, so the best way of doing it is to hold it up against the light source and view from the back. And if I check that against one of my filming lights, I can tell that there's a little bit too much material on each end. So we'll need to do some flattening on there. And we'll also need to do exactly the same process on this face. So this needs to be dead flat, dead square as well. And I've already checked this with a square and it isn't. There's a little bit too much material on this face. And it's not straight either. There again is too much material on the ends. So they will need flattening on all 4 of these joining faces. And then we need to make some recesses in both the central section and the wings for some wooden splines that are going to hold this in position. We'll get to that in a little while. First up, we'll do that truing and squaring process on all 3 components. Okay, so I've just tidied this up with a number 4 plane, and basically I've just took material off the edges where it's out of square. It was kind of twisted a little bit, so I've had to take a bit off here and a bit off there to bring it down kind of to a more square condition, and then I've just cleaned the whole face up so we've got a nice smooth flat square surface there. However, there is still a dip in the middle, so I just need to take some material away from this to bring it back in. It's not much, it's probably about 3/4 mil at the most, so it's hardly any. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually just going to take it off one end at the moment and see if that will take enough material out to give us a nice flat edge. And for that I'm just going to use a nice sharp number 6 plane. And we'll do that because this has got a much longer sole, so it will give you a much straighter finish. And as you can see at the moment, it's only really cutting from the very edge. So we need to plane that away. Until it starts to give us a lot longer cut. And then we can check that with the straight edge to see how we're doing. And we're pretty much there. We just need a little bit more off this end. Ideally I'd like to plane it this way, but I know that'll be going against the grain and it's likely to tear out, so I'm going to have to just do it from this end and just take a little bit off. And you can see there, we're taking a nice thin shaving off from kind of the whole length of that now. So in theory, that should be nice and straight. And it appears to be. And if I get this up into the light, you won't be able to see this. It's not bad, but we do need to make this element a little bit straighter. I've already checked it. It is actually nice and square already. So again, And you can hear this as I plane it, it's taking two cuts. It's taking a cut from here and a cut from there, so we can kind of already tell that there's a dip in the middle. But already that is taking a cut from right the way along the length. Looks straight enough. I've just taken it slightly out of square. There's a bit too much material on this edge, so to correct that, I'll just go back in with my plane and I'm going to move it over so that this edge of the plane is running along the far side of this wood, which will kind of put a little bit of extra weight over this way onto the edge that's high, and that will kind of tend to correct that being out of square. Pretty much got there. There's just a little bit at this end. And I've just checked that against the light and I can't really see anything through the joint, so that is pretty much good enough to go. So I'm just going to repeat exactly the same trick on this top wing. I don't think there's quite so much work to do on it. And then we can move on to getting these splines installed. So I've got a little bit of material that I'm going to use for these splines, and all this is some, I think it's teak, it's just some scrap stuff that I've had knocking about, but it'll be absolutely perfect for this. This is about 8mm at the moment. I can bring this down to thickness once we've got these channels sorted out in the other components. And basically what we need to do is we need to mark the centre line onto here, and we need to cut a couple of slots. They'll be about 6mm wide, because we'll use a 6mm cutter, into the centre section, both top and bottom, and then we'll cut slots on the centre line of the two wings in the corresponding places, cut some little splines that fit into there, and when we want to glue this all together, we've got a repeatable and exact location for where they're going to go, both kind of along this axis and making sure that those wings are centered in this body, which is of course slightly thicker than they are. But I've had a comment recently from a guy saying that I do use a lot of power tools, and could I do some stuff that could be achievable by people that kind of haven't got those power tools. So for this case, I'm going to do one side of this with the router, and then I'm going to flip it over, and the other side I'm actually going to do with a chisel. And I'm going to cut the mortises in by hand, just to give you an idea of how you might want to do that. But we'll start with the router side first. And the first thing we need to do is we need to get a good accurate measurement for how thick this is. It's basically 45mm. So that is 22.5mm for our centre line. So I'll set my calibers up for that. That's 22.52. I think we can safely ignore the 0.2 of a millimetre. In this context, it's not a lot. It's not really a lot in any context, except if you're making parts for jet engines or something, which of course we're not. So with that set up, I'm going to mark from the top face, which is that, of course. I'm just going to put a centre line straight the way down there, which we can use to set our router up. So I'll drop that back in the vise. And I'm going to use the small Katsu router for this. It's plenty powerful enough for what we need. I'm going to set the fence up on it. And as always in these cases, I've got my 1/4" router cutter, which is what I'm actually going to be using to do the work. But I'm going to do my setup with this V-point bit, so I can get the point of that right into that centre line that I've just cut. And it will ensure that I am cutting absolutely central. And that's this fence set up. Just change that for the cutter we want. I've got my router cutter extended probably about 10 mil at the moment, but I will drop this down in a couple of passes, probably to about 15 mil, something like that, and then I can do the same on the other side. Okay, so there's those splines all nicely cut in, and that's positioned that wing pretty much where we want it. There is a little bit of room for final adjustment, but we can leave that for the time being. So next up, we're going to move on to the other side, which as promised will be done with a chisel instead of a router. So I'll move these two bits out of the way for now, because I think these are the two chisels that I want to use. Now, I've had a few comments recently about how I always seem to have very, very sharp chisels, and generally I do keep them nice and sharp. These are actually getting a little bit on the dull side. So before we start any work, we'll break out the water stones and we'll give them a quick touch up. And what I use for this sharpening is just some relatively cheap Japanese water stones. Both of these are from Amazon. Neither of them were particularly expensive. And there's two stones with 4 grits. I've got a 240 and an 800 on this stone. I don't really use the 240 side very much, but generally I'll start at 800. I'll go to 1000 on this stone and then 4000, which should be more than enough. I keep them in this little plastic sandwich box full of water, so they're already pre-soaked, and that also keeps them from getting manky with dust and stuff getting onto them. I tend to put a little tiny drop of bleach in that water as well. It just stops it from going rancid and horrible when it's left in there for a few months. And before I start using the stones, I'll just give them a quick dress with this diamond plate. It's an old one that's worn out, but this side is 400 grit. And that will just make sure that my stone is nice and flat. And what it will also do is it will start to kind of create a little bit of a slurry on top of there, and that's what actually does the cutting. Now I could just do this by hand, and you find the angle of your bevel and then you just polish it backwards and forwards. It's one way of doing it. It's a little bit inconsistent, so I use this Veritas honing guide, and it's basically set up. This bit you set to your angle, and it's got this little stop bit on. You slide your chisel up to that guide, keeping it square with the edge, and clamp that down, and you can take that bit off. And then you can run this backwards and forwards. And what I'm looking to do, and I can just about feel it there, is I'm looking to turn a little burr over. I'm just about where I need to be with it. And you'll just feel that with your finger. And as soon as I start to feel that burr forming, I'll move over. This is now 1000 grit stone. And if you can see that black forming on the stone, that's actually steel coming off the blade. And you can feel quite a distinct burr there. So again, onto the 4000 stone. You don't really need much on this stone. You're just polishing the blade at this point, getting rid of the scratches, such as they were from the rougher grits that we've used. So with that done, we can take this out of the jig, just flip it over and give it a quick polish on the 4000 stone, just to clean that back edge up and also remove that burr. And I can already feel that that's got a very, very nice edge to it, but we're not finished yet. because next up we need to strop it. So we've got a little bit of wood here with 2 pads of leather. One that's kind of impregnated with this honing compound, and I'll just give this probably about 20-ish strokes on the strop, then whip it over. Just give it a few on this side. And all that is doing is just finally polishing the edge into kind of a mirror finish. And that is now as sharp as you need it to be. They will say a good test is if you kind of just push it very gently against your nail, you'll feel it catching if it's sharp enough, which that is. So I'm very quickly just going to touch this one up off camera and we can get on with cutting these mortises in. Okay, so I've started to mark this out a little bit. So I've got the line where I want it to start and finish, and I've put the centre line in as well. So next up, this here is the top of the guitar, and that is the face that I'm referencing everything off. So this marking gauge was set up for that centre line at 22.5 millimeters. So we now need to come back 3 mil from that, set that up from the calipers. And we want a nice deep gauge line in there, and then we're going to reset it at 25.5, which will give us the 6 millimeters that we need. And again, put in a nice deep gauge line, and then with that done, we can come in with our marking knife and cut that face at the end and sever all those fibres. Then we can just take our chisel and just take out that inner corner, and we're doing that just to give ourselves a nice positive reference for when we come to take the final bits out, so we can get our chisel right into that gauge line that we created. And that's the beauty of working with a nice sharp chisel, is that you're not putting any pressure onto the blade to get the cut you like, so you're much less likely to slip and stick the chisel into yourself. Now from here I could take my 6mm chisel and just start chopping this waste out, which is a perfectly acceptable way of doing it, but it will take quite a little time. So instead I'm just going to cheat a little bit, and I'm going to get a power drill with a 4mm bit in, and I'm just going to drill down kind of somewhere near the required depth that we want this mortise to be. And with that done, I can now start to just kind of clear out some of this waste, and I'm going to keep away from my final edge for the time being, because obviously this is shaped a little bit like a wedge, and if I were to just start banging this in next to my final thickness wall, it's going to kind of wedge that backwards, and it will bruise the wood slightly and make our cutout just that little bit wider than we want it. But now we're starting to get much of that waste cleared out. I can actually locate my chisel right into that wall that we cut initially and start to take it down. And then I can just start working my way back with this 6mm chisel until I get right the way back again to the end of our mortise, and then work my way back to this final one. Okay, so there's the 2 splines inserted into the central section of the body, and there's the 2 mortises cut in the top wing, and they just slot on like that. Of the 2, I think I actually prefer the ones I cut with a chisel. Okay, so now that's all kind of fastened together in the right place, we can start to think about getting rid of the rest of the waste, at least on this body section. And to do that, I'm going to break out the French curves again and just kind of find a curve that's going to really blend all of this together nicely. I'm going to cut that like that. It's going to be a few millimeters long, but when this is all glued up properly, I can just get that onto my disc sander and we can put in a nice smooth radius that will blend all three of those elements together. And then again on this lower horn area, we'll just try and find a nice curve that works with what we've got. And I think that's pretty much it. So we'll just kind of rough that in. And with those all marked out, we'll just get this to the bandsaw and get it trimmed down. And there, for the first time, pretty much, is the kind of finalised body shape. There's still a little bit of cleaning up to do in these little bits that I've just cut out, but I actually think that's something that's much better left until I've got these wings glued on properly, which is some way down the line, I know, but it just means that we can sand that in on the bobbin sander and get everything absolutely spot on. But I really like the way that the body is looking now. This looks a lot better down this end now that that great big lump of wood's been cut off. All in all, I think that's some absolutely stunning progress there. Now I've got a choice of things I can do next up. I do need to take a bit of material off the back of the neck to get that nearer its final shape. We could start doing that. I need to start working on a fretboard. We could start doing that as well. And we also need to think about getting this Floyd Rose tremolo system installed. I'm not really quite sure. Let me know in the comments what you'd like to see, and hopefully in a few days time I will have made my mind up as to what that's going to be and we can make a start on doing it. So as always, smash that like button if you've enjoyed this, subscribe if you haven't already done so, and I'll look forward to seeing you next time. Thanks a lot for watching. Bye bye.